Hello everybody, my name is Andre. You might know me as Dre. This is Psych 101, and I hope you guys enjoy these lectures. Thank you. So basically today we're actually going to be talking about social psychology. And social psychology is a very interesting topic, especially in today's world. I think it's definitely very important to understand different aspects of social psychology and just like what it's typically about. I guess it's about like learning about obedience, learning about groupthink, and fundamental attribution error, and all of these fun, wonderful concepts for you to understand how society and psychology kind of mesh together. But the modules that we're going to be covering in this this topic are things called like social thinking, social influence, antisocial relations, and pro-social relations as well. Now, a very interesting thing that I kind of thought about in your textbook that it mentions, which makes a lot of sense, there's these concepts called inclusion and exclusion, right, in society. And we are, as a westernized society, very multicultural and diverse in many different ways in how we think, how we act, what we do, what we believe, what we don't believe. So it's a very interesting thing when you sort of bring up this topic of inclusivity and exclusion. Your textbook says something along the lines that exclusion is actually one of the worst things an individual can experience. Here I go again with my critical thinking skills. When I read something, I don't just read it at face value. I kind of question things, which I encourage you all to do. And I hope I'm leading as an example when you guys read your textbooks and think for your own selves in terms of critical thinking. So my question to you guys is exclusion ultimately a bad, negative thing? You're shaking your head no. Why do you say no?
Because I noticed that at least like in the military, when like people like put pressure on you and they start to kick you out of stuff, that's when you like want to train so you get stronger to be in those groups.
Okay, so it can serve as a motivational factor, which is a key thing. Anybody else? Because obviously, once again, I'm telling you guys, be mindful of the textbook because it really leads you into a thinking pattern that doesn't, if I wrote the textbook, all right, if I wrote it, I would have wrote something along the lines like, yes, it is true, feeling excluded is not fun, and it is harsh to be excluded from a group or a community. However, what do you think are the positives of exclusion? Because there has to be some positives, and I'll probably go down into research studies that actually show the positives, yeah.
I feel like some people, they're really pro to following others, but when you're excluded, like you have no one else to follow but yourself. So I think it gives you a way to be independent rather than like following someone else and trying to be someone else.
Exactly. There's something also in social psychology, and I think you guys probably know the term, what a contrarian is. When it's an individual who basically goes against the contrary to popular belief. And whenever you have this sort of contrarian mindset, people will actually listen to some degree and be like, why is that person thinking the opposite of what everyone else is saying? And that can lead you to actually more influence. But the key thing about being a contrarian or being a minority voice in something, in a topic that all the population is accustomed to, is consistency. You got to remain strong. Once you make a statement that goes against the norm of something and you believe in your heart and in your soul that you are correct, you have to be consistent with it. And that's how people will listen to you. It may suck in the beginning when you are faced with so much, obviously attacks or hate or opposition in your value and your beliefs. But eventually, things will come to fruition if your belief is valid and reasonable, right? And many different times, this is what happens to a lot of people. And this is actually where a lot of people gain their influence, is by stating something small that nobody else can see and standing on it throughout time. And as time progresses, we know that people tend to acculturate or accommodate their thinking patterns to whatever it is that you're stating. And eventually, you will become a stronger influence as a minority. Now, as I'm talking about all this, going back to the topic of what is really the problem with exclusion, can we think about it in other settings, how it can be a positive thing? Because I'm just going to create a personal story with my son, right? So now in his elementary school, they have these classes where they want to be extremely inclusive. And when I was in school, there were these classes, and I don't know if you guys experienced it or not, but there used to be the smaller classroom sizes, the small class, which was to accommodate the individuals that had learning problems or intellectual disabilities and behavioral problems and things like that, right? So in my son's new school, their policies are very based around inclusivity. Like, no, we should not exclude these behavioral problematic children from the classroom because it will make them feel like they're not enough, or they feel like they are different or almost discriminated against based on their intellectual capacities and whatnot. Now, this is where the problem, and I'm just going to say it out loud, personally, me, I don't really agree with the ideas of inclusion. As you probably get it at this point now, you're seeing my thinking patterns and myself that goes against maybe the majority thinking. Many people might say, well, why not? Because inclusion is important. Like, you're talking about people's feelings. Yes, I understand people's feelings, but at the end of the day, my son now is suffering because of your inclusive policies. Because now he goes into the classroom and he always comes to me and says, Daddy, there's a kid out there, he's hitting other kids and he's running out the classrooms. And I'm like, well, are you able to focus? He's like, no, because they're making me laugh, and they even try hitting me, and they hit my other friend Simon, and they hit this kid, and there's like 4 or 5 of them that just don't listen and pay attention in the class. So then how do you expect me as a parent to feel about that, knowing that my son's education is becoming a little dismantled by this inclusivity policy? Am I supposed to conform because everybody else thinks inclusivity is like this beautiful thing that we should all inherit and accommodate and feel for? Does that make sense at all? So do you now, like, as I'm talking and I'm saying these things, in the beginning of this class, you were probably all kind of embellished by the idea of inclusivity because of what you were taught, what you were taught to believe, that this is a good thing. However, when you then go into people's personal experiences, I'm not the only one with this grievance. I hear it all the time from other parents. Oh my God, my kid can't focus in the classroom because other kids are acting out. Well, have you talked to your school's policies about the classroom settings and things like that? Because that's something where you kind of have to stand up and advocate for yourself. Because obviously, if your child is suffering in their education, that is making you have this grievance now. And I completely understand it because I'm a parent myself. But then I have to talk with the other parents on the other side. Now let's go into their perspectives, right? Your son has an intellectual disability and they're in this classroom where they're being included because of these inclusive policies. Do you as a parent feel like it's beneficial to your child? And those parents say, well, I don't, some say, yeah, like I want my child to feel included, but some of them are saying like, hey, yeah, but you should check my son's grades. Like they're obviously not doing as great as they should be. So to sort of have this inclusive policy, it takes away that small classroom setting where there can be a stronger focus on these children. And they can definitely succeed a lot more effectively, I personally believe. But, everybody's going to have their viewpoints on this and their opinions about it. And I want to hear your perspectives. And once again, I know just generally I come from a place, I know as I'm teaching, I know you hear what I'm saying. And it almost sounds like I go against the majority thinking a lot. But I'm letting you guys know I go against the majority thinking based on my own personal experiences and based on research studies in this sort of field that I'm aware of. So I had that standpoint, and I think I have a pretty valid standpoint. But to promote this idea of inclusivity in all classrooms, it could just really, you can't, I just think honestly, in a multicultural society, you can't include everybody. What do you guys think about that?
I get what you're saying, but you have to look at it from the other side.
Yeah, which I did.
If your child was on the other end of it, do you want your child to be picked on because they're in a smaller class? Because it happens. Mm-hmm. It happens. Because then everybody knows the special education kids.
Yeah.
Because the class is pointed out and they're made fun of for things that aren't necessarily their fault.
I'm not going to lie to you. You're talking to a special ed kid. and I'm here.
So how did it feel?
I personally felt like, honestly, to me, it didn't matter. And I think, like, at a very young age, my parents taught me, like, personal responsibility and taught me, look, you can succeed in this. I had dyslexia when I was a child. I had to go to resource room. I had to be pulled out of the classroom to go to the resource room, to speech therapy, to this, counseling, everything. I did the whole shebang, you know, and I do feel like when I had more focus on me, I think that's what helped me. Like, as a smaller class, like, personally, I'm telling you my personal story. Other kids may not see it that way. Yes, I felt bullied a little bit. I felt a little timid, shy, maybe, whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, I'm happy I had the mom that I had, because she raised me to be like, you know, like, take responsibility. Stop, like, blaming things for other people, from other things and stuff like that. You are responsible for what you do. Read the books, read the textbook. And I found it to help. And then I got out of it when I was, like, in 3rd grade. I was there from 1st up until 3rd grade. I was in that smaller classroom size. I got left back in 1st grade.
Oh, my son did too. I don't know what.
And I'm proud to say that. I'm proud to say that. Because look at where I am now. Doesn't matter. That stuff doesn't matter. You have to really just work harder and try your best, because that is what's important. And I think you need your parents there to help as well, like in my own personal story. But just letting you guys know, this inclusive policy, it's fairly new. It's been going on for the past, like, maybe decade or less. Yeah. Some schools, so some districts are different. So some districts may still have that sort of policy with the small classrooms, but a lot of them now are implementing the inclusive policy of, like, no, we should include everybody in the classroom. So I know I'm going on the topic of exclusion being a positive thing in some ways, but inclusion also has its positives that you can't deny. Like, there are positives to the feeling aspect, the social emotional learning aspect, and things like that. However, you know, just like in my own personal experiences, what I hear from parents, you know, I'm just like, you know, are these policies really helpful to the end point of, like, literacy skills, math skills, the actual educational skills that are necessary for kids to carry on into their adult lives? Is that really a good policy for those things? Like, yeah, the feeling's great and all, but, like, you know, it's something that it's like, you know, what's more important in a society? Now, when we talk about social psychology, obviously you guys need to know the definition of it, right? Scientific study of how we think about, influence, and relate to one another. It deals with social interactions, their origins, and the effects on individuals. Now, a biggest thing that we're going to talk about that's important to understand, just as, like, Psych 101 students, is the attribution theory. And then we'll talk about the fundamental attribution error that a lot of us experience without noticing it until you learn it. Then you start to experience, like, wow, yeah, that was a fundamental attribution error. Attribution theory is basically when it suggests one's attempt to understand behavior of others by attributing feeling, beliefs, and intentions to them, right? And then you have distributional attribution and situational attribution. So, for example, if you're driving down the road and somebody cuts you off, you might attribute right away that that person is a bad driver, like they're the worst driver ever. But you're not really considering their situation. The situation, well, what you are doing is situational attribution. You're taking the situation and you're applying it to this person's personality, characteristic, whatever the case is, and that can become an error, because that's it, and we're all victim to that. We're all victim to situational attribution errors. Like, whenever you're in a situation, like in this classroom, for example, you might think that I am a very outgoing person because I'm speaking to a whole class of people. But I will say I am extroverted. But some teachers, you might think are, oh wow, that person's very extroverted because they can speak and hold their classroom's attention or whatever the case is, so they must be extroverted. But that's you, but then in reality, they might be the shyest person. You basically take the situation socially and you apply it to the individual. That's a situational distribution. But the distributional attribution will be the opposite of situational. And they can both lead to what is known as the fundamental attribution error, which is the tendency for observers, when analyzing others' behavior, to underestimate the impact of the situation and to overestimate the impact of a personal disposition. You know, a lot of times what even happens in my field, in mental health counseling, you'll have a lot of clients coming in, and it's like the first impression is almost the most important impression. Because if you come off in a certain way, that person is going to be like, yeah, I don't want to continue this. But I always encourage people, look, if you didn't appreciate today's session because of whatever reasons, I'm just letting you know. I may have come off tired. I may have, it's just a day today. But usually on other days, I may be a little bit more alive and energetic. So this is why I always encourage people, give it like a couple more tries. Give it a couple more tries. Don't just take it for what it is after one situation or one experience because of the fundamental attribution error. All right? Now, when we talk about the fundamental attribution error, it's very important to bring back the topic of explicit and implicit biases, especially implicit bias, right? We've talked about implicit biases. Yeah, so it's a very subconscious type of bias. Like you have this sort of belief based on your past experiences, your stereotypes, your sort of unconscious or subconscious beliefs about an individual can really play a role in your implicit bias. And it can play a role in the fundamental attribution error and distributional attribution, right? You're basically distributing past experiences and about an individual based on how they look, maybe their skin color, their hair type, their cultural ethnicity. All these things are going to play a certain role in fundamental attribution error. So that's why it's important to be mindful of your implicit biases, right? So just, take a while to question those things because they're very important. What factors affect our attributions? Culture, whose behavior, and exceptions, right? So culture, Westerners value more personal traits versus people in China and Japan, which is very interesting because in the Eastern world, a lot of people in the Eastern world versus the Western world place a lot of value in their analysis of an individual based on their environment and their circumstances rather than the individual's personality, right? So how do our attributions matter? Well, examples in the United States. Attribution becomes political, but our attributions are based on many different values in America. If we're now going into the United States, you got examples in the United States of fundamental attribution errors is this political conservatives versus political liberals, right? Political conservatives tend to attribute responsibility to personal dispositions of people who are unemployed or living in poverty. So more conservative mindset is this mindset of saying, well, you have the personal responsibility to do whatever you want. You have the freedom to choose whatever you want, whatever the case is. Political liberals and those not primed to consider the power of choice are more likely to blame past and present situations. And this becomes a fundamental attribution error on both sides. Because now you're not considering the bigger story and the bigger picture of everybody else. And this is where empathy starts to play a role in understanding a person's experiences, their education, their background, and their beliefs. And this is what you need to hone in on if you want to understand humans. And an interesting fact, actually, in personality psychology, there's actually a biological component to conservative thinking. I mean, you got to be mindful about politicians, right? I mean, they can say something to capture your interest, they'll capture your attention, and they necessarily won't really agree with it. And there's been some Congress people that have been outspoken about their own beliefs against certain policies, which is interesting. So you're there for more of what the people want rather than what your own personal belief is. Now let's get into cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance, big one. This is a big one. Cognitive dissonance is a relief from tension, and it's when attitudes do not fit with actions. Tensions are often reduced by changing attitudes to match actions. The idea of cognitive dissonance is that action propels attitude, that action is important. Whenever you're stuck in between two conflicting viewpoints of something, once you start taking action towards one route or the other, that cognitive dissonance, that tension, starts to decrease, and you feel a sense of relief. So basically, let's say, for example, you have a high school student who hates math. Right? You have a high school student who hates math, right? However, they have to go to school and they have to do math because that's just part of the curriculum. Now, there's a sort of cognitive dissonance in that student, which is basically, I hate math, but I have to do it anyway. So now it creates this tension, this strong tension of negative energy towards the dissonance, right? The discomfort, right? We act to reduce the discomfort. The dissonance is the discomfort, like, oh, I got to go to math class every day, whatever the case is. Okay, but now let's take action in your cognitive belief, your bias, your cognition, right? This is CBT, this is cognitive behavioral therapy, by the way. So then as I tell the student, why not like look at math in a different light? Change your perspective about math. Change how you're seeing it. Because how you're seeing it obviously is creating this dissonance and this discomfort. And once you start seeing it differently, then you can start taking action on it and try harder in the math class. And I want you to start, when you get home from school, this is your therapy homework, is to basically sit down, open the textbook, and start reading the math and start doing it. Or go on khanacademy.com and practice it, because they literally teach you how to do it through videos and whatnot. So as you start to take action on the math, my question is it more of the child's belief that's shifting the aspect of liking math more, or is it the action of the child practicing it more and engaging in it more that's changing their belief about how they see math? What's relieving the cognitive dissonance? The action or the perceptual mind play? What do you guys think? Exactly. I think it's more based on a process effect. Maybe you start off with the mind-changing part, and then you can take the action after. And that's usually what I notice. And a lot of times what I notice is that kids would tell me, like, yeah, that actually does work. Like, it makes me feel less tension or dissonance when it comes to now going to my math class that I have to do. Anybody else have an idea about that? What do you guys think? Is it the behavior? You think it's both? What do you guys think? Any other ideas of that? Because it's a very important tool used in cognitive behavioral therapy. Anybody else? You think that you can do that? Your own dissonance towards a certain class subject? Do you think that's possible to do? If you start taking action on it, you start to actually practice it, and maybe you even look into why do people study this, and you start to find and develop that interest, what's working more, the action or the thought process? Well, it's both. That's why it's called cognitive behavioral therapy. Cognition, thought, behavior, action. That's what's important about that. And that's what helps a lot of students that don't like math, is once you start taking action. It's interesting because, what I've noticed working with people that smoke cigarettes and trying to, help them stop is like breathing exercises. And, one of the things that you kind of pick at a little bit, might not be the whole cause or effect, but when somebody smokes a cigarette, they're breathing, right? And they say it's a stress reliever. That's what you usually get from most cigarette smokers. Why do you smoke? Oh, it relieves my stress. Okay, so when you're smoking, what are you doing? Well, you're breathing, right? And you're doing that a couple of times. And breathing itself is known to decrease stress. Whenever you're stressed out, you just, practice meditation. You breathe in and you breathe out and you kind of flow with your breath. It kind of can help release stress. So is that what you're really attuned to rather than the actual smoke itself? Maybe the smoke is making it feel a lot better, but we got to get you to stop this sort of smoking because it's killing you. Like, there's an obvious cognitive dissonance within your idea of smoking cigarettes. And the constant time that you keep taking action and smoking the cigarettes, the more you're just putting yourself in this cycle of bad habit. We gotta work on figuring out how to manage that. Same thing with pornography addiction. They know it's bad for you, but you're over here doing it repeatedly. So your action is shaping your attitude. But once your attitude starts to change and we work on your attitude towards pornography, towards weed smoking, cigarette smoking, once your attitude changes, you are more likely to change the behavior, which will then change you in general. So this whole thing, this cognitive dissonance theory, is really based on the aspect of, can people really change? Can you change your behaviors? Can you change your attitudes? And I think the answer is yeah. You just got to put it into action. Action. And that's usually the type of therapy homework I give all of my clients is, okay, this past week, what did you do in terms of action orientation? And what did you do in terms of cognitive processing of this information or this issue that you're having? Let's talk about it. Let's work on it, because action is the most important thing. We could sit here, talk about your attitudes about things all day and waste time, but at the end of the day, what really matters is how you're going to move forward. And you usually move forward through action. According to the cognitive dissonance theory, we know that specific brain regions become active when people experience cognitive dissonance. It's almost like a feeling of self-frustration, shame, and guilt to some degree about what you're really believing versus what you're actually doing. And that is the key components, and I kept telling you guys before, I personally feel like that's the key component to actual change, is when you're not doing something and you recognize it, and that shame kind of tells you, bro, you're not doing anything about it though. Like, come on, feel bad, and then change that, right? You're not gonna change there feeling good all the time. And then the last thing is, action is key to releasing that tension. Changing our behavior can change how we think about others and how we feel about ourselves. This is a very important thing to learn about in terms of helping yourself become a better advocate for yourself, to help yourself feel self-empowered and valuable as your own individual, to enhance your self-esteem and to enhance your ability to take action in things. You got to understand how to counteract your own cognitive dissonance to a large extent. Now we're going into persuasion. Now, when we talk social psychology, an important aspect of it is how do you persuade others to believe a certain thing that you believe to be true? Because it sounds like a lot of things today. You know, there's a lot of persuasion going on all across technology, news, social media, and things like that. We're all being persuaded in some way, right? I mean, it's interesting when you think about it because then there's a level of creativity that stems from this idea of persuasion. And I think to be like more of a creative mindset, you will probably be less persuaded. Because, I mean, even when you think about when somebody makes music, a lot of the music that's being made goes off of somebody else's beat or tune or melody or whatever the case is. But to create something from just nothing, right? Like a blank slate, it's an interesting thing. Like it's creativity, right? When we talk about persuasion, it can take on many forms, you know, not just in music, but in politics, beliefs, the world, social world, whatever the case is, culture. There's two types of persuasional routes, right? There's the peripheral route persuasion when occurs when people are influenced by incidental cues, such as a speaker's attractiveness about a topic or something. So it's more in the peripheral that you're being persuaded. Central route persuasion occurs when interested people focus on the arguments and respond with careful, favorable thoughts. Now, it's interesting because when we talk about the idea and concepts of persuasion, me, as a therapist, these are the things we have to be mindful of when working with individuals. Because our jobs as therapists is not to persuade people to believe a certain thing or a certain value. Our job is more to help the individual reframe their way of thinking when it's causing discomfort or disorder. But I mean, what do you guys think about therapists? Like, do you think therapists should be a little bit persuasive in some way? I think it's natural, yeah.
Yeah, I think they should be.
Yeah.
Because,
I mean, I gotta persuade you to come meet with me every week, right? Like, look at me, look what I'm about, right? Like, yeah, this is who I am, this is what I do.
So if somebody has attitude that is affecting them, and you're a therapist, if you're so harsh on them, you don't make them see the point in them.
But you know what's crazy? Some therapists actually have that approach, like where they're just extremely direct.
They will not get the people problem solved.
Yeah, probably not. But a lot of therapists there are therapists, and like it was actually interesting because I had a client, and she was telling me she wanted to terminate because she was telling me that I'm not direct enough. Like I don't tell her what she should be doing. I had to explain to her. I'm like, yeah, but my approach is that I really feel like the goal of therapy is self-empowerment. Like you're supposed to take the stand. Like you're not making friends because of I'll ask you, why do you think you're not making friends? And then we explore that. You know what I mean? Like I'm not going to tell you, oh, go to the club or go to the library or go to the school and make friends and stuff like that. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But she wanted that. And I know this therapist that she's a colleague of mine, and I know she's like a very direct therapist. Like every time I send a client to her, they just come back to me and just like, I couldn't do it. And I'm just like, so why? I mean, it's like, I told you, but very direct. Like, oh, I see that you're struggling with this because obviously you're still with the boyfriend that you hate. Obviously you hate the boyfriend, and like just being very direct. And
so apparently, a psychologist like you, if you don't have a bit of persuasion,
yeah.
it won't work.
I won't work. Yeah, exactly. So I think it is necessary to be a little persuasive, but to the extent of the client's subjective goals.
Yes.
Like, obviously, like, you're not gonna come here and I'm gonna talk to you about like banning pornography or something and my beliefs about it. I'm gonna tell you like, what do you think it is? You know what I mean? Like all these type of things. So the do nots in terms of, critically persuading somebody or like effectively persuading someone is do not loudly argue your position before listening, right? That doesn't work with people. Humiliate people or imply that they are ignorant, right? Do not name call, do not degrade. You're not going to persuade anybody that way. Bore people with complex and forgettable information, right? You got to make the information meaningful and attach it. This is where, like, in my practice, I do a lot of like psychoeducation work with my therapists. So the therapist I supervise, an intern, I'm like, it's straight up like lectures, basically. The supervision, the group supervision. I'm just talking about everything I talk to you guys about here, about locus of control, fundamental attribution errors, implicit biases, know all your biases. I hand out sheets to my therapists of all the cognitive biases that exist. I want you to memorize all of them. When you come back next week, we'll talk about it. I'll sit down with you. You're going to have to explain to me what each bias is, type of thing. Like, I really challenge my therapist to have psychoeducation. But then I started noticing that exact problem. A lot of my therapists were like, yeah, I tried providing it, but like the client started yawning and wasn't listening, whatever the case is. And I'm like, okay, so then you got to learn how to then make it more fun and attribute it to the individual's life. You can't just talk about sleep hygiene and when the person's like yawning or whatever the case is, all this type of stuff. You got to like really know the perfect time, place, and energy that you got to use to convey a psychoeducational tool that they can use. So a lot of that is being used. So like I try to tell them like make it more exciting, try to be more exciting in that regard. I'm still figuring out how to like have a template to show therapists how to do that. But the do's, right? Identify your shared goals and values. And that's another thing, you kind of deal with persuasion. Now, as a therapist, I tell you guys, I'm a very dynamic therapist. I work with all types of people. Like I work with all the liberal clients, the conservative clients, all different types of people, right? Now, an interesting thing that I noticed is that as a therapist, you're supposed to, your bias should not exist in the therapy room. And we're trained to do that, actually. How are we trained? We're trained by doing, we have to do a whole autobiography, a self-autobiography of our own selves, our own personal values. And in our graduate programs, it's like a whole 20-page autobiography from the beginning of our lives to the end to build a sense of self-awareness around ourselves so we know that we're not intruding in our clients' perceptions. So there's a lot of people in the therapy world that basically say you should not work with a client that doesn't have or align with your own values and beliefs. And I kind of disagree with that because at the end of the day, number one, that's discriminatory. Like, I'm a healthcare professional. That's like saying a doctor shouldn't operate on an individual because they're probably a Trump supporter and their client is a Kamala supporter or whatever the case is. It's like saying something like that. It's just not, it's discriminatory to me. Like, I don't think I should deny a person access to mental health care because they believe the opposite of what I believe. I have to learn to separate those biases and work with the individual. And I find a lot more experience being gained when I do that because it opens my mind up to all these different experiences and I understand their values and why they are the way they are, why they're suffering. But you got to check those implicit biases. What do you guys think about that? Should a therapist work with somebody whose values align with their values, or should a therapist try to really manage their own biases and work and help everybody? What do you think? Because this is what goes on in the field. It's a topic to discuss. It's something important. What do you guys think about that? Help everyone, okay. Anybody else disagree? I mean, there's no right answer here. It's just it's a matter of like opinion. Because there are therapists that I know personally turn away people if they have certain political viewpoints than theirs. I know therapists like that. What do you guys think? Yeah.
If your job, if a prerequisite to becoming a psychologist is to remove all your biases, then I don't see why you would reject someone over their political affiliation. Because it's like, if you're already training yourself to realize, like, the places where you're biased and to, like, circumvent that, why are you going to create an echo chamber and serve only people that, like, agree with you?
Exactly. And I kind of just, that's my point of view as well. Like, I just don't see. And I know, all right, yeah, and you got to recognize when your work is being detrimental to the client as well. like for example, like I don't work with eating disorders. I'm not specialized in eating disorders. So if a client comes to me and says, oh, I have eating disorder issues, I'll be like, well, I don't do that, and I think you should get better help from this other therapist. Go to that therapist, right? Like it's, but then it's like, you know, when it comes to like beliefs though, like cultural beliefs, cultural practices, things like that you don't really align with, it's interesting because it's like you got to kind of cut that out and stuff and see how that goes. I mean, you know, it's just, and at the end of the day, ultimately, it's up to the client. You know, if the client feels comfortable with you, you know, however you present yourself too. It's like, you know, you present yourself in this way, I feel comfortable with that, or you don't. So it's a very interesting thing. You want to say something?
I was going to say that being like a therapist would definitely not be a job for me, because if someone has like completely opposite beliefs, like in terms of values, religion, morals, well, mostly morals, but I wouldn't be able to like work with them. Like, how would you be able to connect with someone and help them figure out what they want and reach their goal if you can't? If you can't
Separate your own biases and your beliefs. Well, that's why you got to train yourself to kind of be open and understand others and practice empathy.
But
Yeah.
in that case, like that's a good point. Like, why would you become a therapist if you're not willing to overcome your own cognitive biases and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Then you shouldn't become a therapist to begin with.
Yeah. Or you can just navigate towards a specific population. You know, if that's what you choose to do. I mean, but then it's like, you know, you gotta sort of play the back room and be like, no, I don't have enough space on my schedule, whatever the case is. You just can't discriminate directly. Yeah.
What do you do if you have like a client that just comes in, they just don't speak to you, and they just don't want to speak to you?
Oh, I've had that a lot. I just, you know, I honestly, great question. It really depends on each person. I don't know. I just don't, you know, you guys see my personality. Like, you guys see it here, like, pretty evidently. Like, do you think it's hard to talk to me? Like, if you were to approach me, do I look unapproachable? Do I look, you know what I mean? Like, so that's what I say too. Like, with therapists, and this is what I assess when I hire therapists actually, are their personalities. I assess personality before I do a hiring or I take on an intern or a practicing pre-licensed therapist. I want certain personalities really mesh well with other personalities. Usually it's like the ENFJs or the INFJs in terms of personality. Yeah.
Sometimes you talk to them and then they are quote unquote accepting, but then as time goes on, they become judgmental.
To the client?
To the client, yeah.
Oh, the therapist becomes judgmental to the client? Yeah, and that happens, and that's something that I personally have to be mindful of, because like you're saying, the judgment, like my personality, I'm an ENFJ. So I'm judgmental. Believe it or not, I'm a judgment. Like I like, you know, I look at people, I'm like, oh, those shoes look nice, or that shirt looks good, or.
But that's something different. Like a lot of people go to therapy for different reasons.
Yeah.
Like, some people go because of their childhood traumas, they can't get over or whatever. And then there's people who sit there and they try their best to explain everything that's going on, and then it's the therapist says, look at them like, oh, well, you went through this, well, where's this person, where was that person, oh, why did you have to go through all this?
And you have to make those judgments through the exploration process, which is why I think judgmental types are better therapists than perceptual types. Because the perceptual types would see every situation and just perceive it and not say anything about it. The judgment types will call it out and be like, well, what did you think about your parents? And why do you think you had this resentment towards your parents? Because there's obviously resentment. So the judgment has more of a better like ability to question more. Yeah. So I know we're coming on time.